All right, I'm gonna fire up the recording.
It's not on the, it's not on the screen.
These things are amazing when they work.
We're on the inside track over here. Guys are on the outside track.
That's okay.
All right, it's 5:30 and welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight for a special meeting of the City of Harbor Springs Planning Commission. Today is Thursday, December 1st, and it's 5:30 p.m. And we have a little different agenda tonight because we decided that we were going to come and focus entirely on the zoning code tonight. And we had been unable to get to that through 2 or I think even 3 different meetings because there's so much other pressing business. And so thanks for your agreement to come out tonight and really dig into it. And what's different tonight is we don't have any minutes to approve from the last meeting. So we'll get those on the next meeting. And we can move right into public comments and correspondence. Is there anybody who in the audience who would like to make a comment?
Well, can I assume that there'll be a time to make comments while you're discussing the zoning code?
We could do that, sure.
Yeah, for you, Michael, sure.
Yeah.
Why don't we do a roll call and verify we have a quorum?
That's a great idea, Jeff. Let's do a roll call and verify that.
All right, Rick Tarczynski. Here. Vanessa Warren,
Here.
Emily DeBay,
Here.
Bob Thoma. Here. George Pete is absent, Bill Mulder,
Here,
Mark Boudet. Here. Barry Lustgarten.
Here.
Nancy Rondell. Here. Welcome to the Planning Commission.
yes, welcome Nancy. Nancy is taking Al's place as the council representative. Welcome, Nancy.
And we have a quorum.
Great, we have a quorum and George, we don't have. We may see him, we may not. So, all right. So we are here tonight to talk about the draft that John and team have provided for us to review of the zoning code, articles 2 and 3. John and Jeff, would you like to tell us what we should know about that?
Sure, can do. The Article 2 and 3 of the new code or the proposed code that we're working on really replaces a number of articles. Articles 4 through, I think it's 17 of the current ordinance. The way that the new articles are set up is Article 2 is the zoning districts and the maps. And it's nothing more than the intent, the purpose or intent of each of the districts that are described in Article 2. And then Article 2 will also, when we finish, include the zoning map. Okay. The way that your current ordinance is set up is that Article 4 is your general use district regulations. And it has, which is unusual, it has the legal descriptions for all the various zoning districts in the city. And the reason why that's unusual is that anytime that you would change a parcel, a rezoning, then you would have to go back into the code and change the entire legal description. So it's very cumbersome. So this is one of the first times I've ever seen the legal descriptions described for each of the zoning districts. Usually the map is the source that describes the zoning district, not the legal description. So this Article 2 is, it includes all of your current districts, and then it has the intent of established zoning districts in terms of what the intent is. So it's pretty straightforward, okay? Article 3 is the area that you really need to take a look at. Now, I will tell you that we did not arbitrarily make any changes to the use table. That's up to the planning commission. So if you were to go to your current code, I'll go right to the first district, which is the agricultural district. It has it always starts out with permitted principal uses, and it lists them, and then it has a section that says permitted accessory uses, and then it has a section called special land uses, and it lists them along with some definitions. The way that the new code is set up, it's in tabular form. Okay, so for example, the way the table is set up, it's broken up by land use categories. So the table is, first part of the table is residential uses. And you go to it and look up, first thing is boarding and rooming houses. And you just go across and it shows, based on tabular form, what districts those are located in. Because in the current code, it repeats some of the same districts or uses over and over and over and over again. So this is a way of reducing the volume of the code by making it more tabular and graphic. Right? This is the section that the PC needs to really take a look at relative to if you're going to make any changes to the special or the permitted or special uses. Like I said, we didn't arbitrarily make any changes. We just listed the layout of your current code on these tables. Okay, so once you get through that, then each one of your districts, starting with your ag and your agricultural residential, there's also a table that has all the dimensional requirements and any additional requirements within that district. All right. Again, they're in tabular form. So you can go right to the district, take a look at the minimum lot width, minimum lot area, the maximum coverage, and what the setbacks are, both for the principal building and for the accessory building.
Jeff, could you go to maybe page 7 or something of the code so the folks in the audience could see?
Absolutely.
The layout.
So that right there is a district layout. Okay. The idea was to make the code obviously user friendly. So you could take a look at a table that would say, okay, if I want to build a single family home, these are the districts I can build it in. And if I happen to be in that residential district, I can flip to the R1A page and I can see all of my dimensional requirements and any additional requirements that are specified by the zoning. And that is Article 3. Pretty concise.
User friendly.
I think that was the mission that you guys gave me, was to
Mhm.
make it user friendly.
Mhm.
It becomes much more concise. All the way through.
And then, as I had mentioned before, when this is all finally put together in a total document, ready for the public to be posted on the web, on the PDF, we will hyperlink different pages and terms. So if somebody goes through, if they want to click a term, it'll automatically take them to that page, and then vice versa. So it'll be easy to navigate on the web rather than having to scroll through 80 or 100 pages of text.
Any comments or questions at this point?
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah. The more you can simplify it, the better off everybody will be. Good job.
Mark, as a user of zoning codes, does this,
Oh, yeah, no, this is what I'm used to seeing. This is type of stuff. You see this across the state, across the country, in other states. It's, they're all set up like this. You go to like upcodes.com or whatever, you know, they have all the codes for the entire country for each state broken down, and you go to all of them, they all look like this. You know, ours was, okay.
Great.
But we are gonna go through each of these, because I have just, okay, got a whole, not a whole bunch of stuff, but some stuff, you know, I want to discuss.
so? Sounds like we like the format. We appreciate the simplification and all that. And so now the question comes down to the content of it, which is way more complicated, way more impactful and more meaningful. So maybe we could discuss how we would want to attack that. There are probably some little corrections we'd like to make that everybody may have noticed, but then there's some potentially really big things that we've been talking about for the last couple of years that we might want to consider when this time came around. People have any thoughts about how to do that?
I might suggest looking, if you want to look at the uses first and determine if you feel that there are any potential changes you would like to make as far as things that are permitted uses versus special land use requests. Because any choices that you make there may impact your choices that you make when you then go to look at some of the zoning specific things like setbacks. And I think my best example that I can come up with there is we've talked about, or it's been mentioned, I think, at least as a discussion topic, guest quarters or accessory dwelling units, and possibly making that easier to do. Maybe we leave it as a special land use. But I know we talked about that. And I think that the choices that you make there may impact your choice on what you want to do for setbacks for those buildings. Because one of the concerns that we have had existing is that accessory buildings are permitted to be very close to a side yard or a rear yard setback, 5 feet in some neighborhoods. And that has been one of the potential contentions from neighbors, is now we have, instead of a 1-story garage, a 2-story building that's, you know, fairly close to a side yard or a rear yard property line. So if we are thinking about making a change to that, we maybe want to look at a change in the setbacks that might apply to those. Just as food for thought, as at least a process for looking at things, maybe start at looking at uses and whether it's permitted or special uses, and if we like where they are now, and then move into setbacks and things like that. If, as a thought for a way to proceed.
And to dovetail into that, I think it'd be nice if we look at the definitions of some of the uses like B1 and B2. Is that still appropriate or not in the current locations? If it's still appropriate to have that type of division. That's one thing that I've commented on before. But I like your format.
Does that sound people start with the uses and see where that takes?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some macro questions too, like, do we need as many zoning districts as we have today? And yeah. And a number of other questions and things I'd like to learn about as new ideas, new concepts in zoning and city planning. And John, are we, in your view, are we heavy on the number of zoning districts, or do you see places to consolidate?
It really, I haven't been working with you folks that long to really understand why you have as many as you have. So you're gonna have to enlighten me. I know that right now I'm working with another community on trying to collapse theirs because they have 28 zoning districts. And for example, in that case, they had 2 districts that were everything was identical with the exception in one district. A brew pub wasn't permitted, it was a special use, which didn't make sense why you have two districts to identify them. You know, so I think it's really the planning commission. You know, I would like to hear what, for example, Mark's concerns are or ideas about why to consolidate B1 and B2. I mean, those are policy issues that you all need to talk about. But I certainly don't have any issue with the reduction in zoning districts. One of the things that I found over the years with single family districts where you have R1, R2, or R1A, R1B, R1C, R1D, all that. The only difference in those districts are not the permitted or special use. It's just the minimum lot size. Okay, right. That's the only difference. So sometimes I think as a planner, does it really matter if we get that prescriptive in terms of lot size? Because in some older traditional neighborhoods, you may have a lot that's 100 feet wide. You may have a lot next to it that's 75 feet wide. You may have had a lot that was platted at 100 feet, but 30 years ago, somebody divided it in half to two 50-foot lots. And then all of a sudden it becomes non-conforming. So what does it, sometimes I ask the question rhetorically, does it really matter in terms of having separate single family districts for lot size? Because the lot is really going to dictate, you know, the size of the building. And not the district itself.
John, should our system be compressed? Could it be compressed?
I think if you take a look at it,
Simplified.
it could be simplified, sure.
And who does that? You?
You,
On recommendation from you or?
I'll give you advice if I think you're going down the wrong path, but I think it's a policy issue. You know the community better than I do. So this is really an opportunity for the PC, I think what Bill was saying, a macro vision, to take a look at some of those issues. Do you want to collapse some of these? And then we can analyze real quickly, fairly quickly, what that impact would be. But I think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
your thoughts?
You know, we have the different districts because we have some differences between them. Looking at the R1 districts, A, B, C, and E. Like John said, primarily, we have, I think, two differences. There are some small differences in uses. In some of the districts, guest quarters don't require special land use approval, and in other ones they do. As an example, like R1A and R1E, it's more typical to see guest quarters in those areas and they don't require special land use. They may still require special land use if they're requesting a 2-story building to put them in, which is usually what we end up seeing. The other difference, like he said, is the size of the property, but also the setback requirements. Those are quite different. And a lot of those come from, again, R1C is probably our largest single family residential district. And that would be pretty much all residential properties from Pine Street, Maple Street, Summit Street, and north. So everything on those side roads in there, all the properties along Lake Street, and then all of the properties in Layton Park, which would be the subdivision by the IGA. R1C, again, minimum lot size is quite small at 6,500 square feet with 65 feet of frontage. We also have, because those are small lots, we allow for very small setbacks. For the principal building, it's an 8-foot side yard setback. For an accessory structure, it's a 5-foot side yard setback and a 5-foot rear yard setback. Whereas when you go to some of the other districts like R1A and R1E, which would be properties that are along the lakefront, like Weetwitansing, Glen Drive, they're much larger lots. And then they also have larger setbacks where their side yard setback might be 12 to 15 feet as opposed to 8. So just some of the thoughts of why we have the different ones that we have there. If we think that we can do some combining there, we can certainly look at that. B1 and B2. We've got the information here we can look at. I think primarily the difference there is what are the permitted uses. As we stray from CBD, the uses expand. B1, I think, allows for all uses within the CBD. But then adds a couple of uses. And then B2 allows for all the uses in CBD and B1, and then adds a couple more uses there as well. And generally we're trending farther from downtown when we get into those districts. But if we look at those uses and think that we can expand where they go or whatnot, that's a choice that you guys will have to make.
In future meetings like this, it would be to our advantage to have you, the guy who does this job, bring us a wish list.
Oh, I have a list.
Okay.
I definitely do. I have a list of
It
some
would be
topics.
foolhardy for me to make decisions about zoning. We cannot talk to you about it.
Well, no, we've got a mental list, some things written down. We actually gathered information from you about some things that we would like to address as we go through this process. A great example of something that is on my list to at least discuss, and tonight would be probably a good time to do it, in the single family residential districts. When we talk about our side yard setbacks, we'll use R1C as an example. The side yard setback for a principal building is 8 feet or 12% of the width of the lot. So if you have a larger lot, it requires a larger setback. But that has come up a couple of times. It's caused some issues, which have possibly prevented people from making some changes that they wanted with their property. And when it's come up as for discussion with the planning commission or city council, the thought has been, why do we really have that? Bill, I'll pick on you a little bit. Bill he's got 2 lots with his house and his guest quarters, cottage there or in the back, carriage house, I guess. And then there was the lot next to him that had a home on it. He purchased that home, removed that building, and then wanted to modify the property line between them and make some changes to his home. With that 12% rule, if he moved his property line, it would have created part of his home would have then been an existing nonconformity or a zoning violation, because by widening his property, his lot, it would have increased his side yard setback and made part of his property non-compliant. So, but when that came up, the process was he submitted a lot split application to me. Because of that situation, I had to deny it. It went to city council for review. Any property owner has the right to appeal lot split things to them. And through discussion, it was like, well, do we really need this rule? Was kind of that was the gist that I got from that conversation. And that has been something that has been kind of a sticky wicket that has sometimes prevented people from doing things. So my question to planning commission is, do we still see a necessity on, let's say, if somebody has a double lot as opposed to a single lot, in requiring them to have a larger setback? Asking them to build more in the middle of their property than to one side or another. If you feel that that's still appropriate, we'll leave it in. If you think that that's something that isn't needed anymore, maybe that's something we could take out or change or modify in a way.
In the future, can that lot be split back again?
That's a conversation that I have with somebody that wants to combine property or change property boundaries. It's going to depend on the zoning at the time when they want to split things back out. It's very easy to combine property. If you have 2 lots and you want to make it 1 lot because you prefer to have 1 tax bill, that's very easy to do. It's just a written letter to me requesting that change. However, I like to remind people that to split the lots back out, there is a process and an application, and it has to meet zoning requirements at that time. So it is a little bit more difficult to do.
Well, if you're willing, maybe we dig into the uses and then we'll keep a lookout for districts that are very, very similar, and we can decide if maybe there are some ones that we could. And that might be a good place to start tonight. Are you willing? All right, sure. What's the best way to do this? John, do you want to take us through use by use or should?
You can start right at the top of the chart and go down use by use. Take a look at it. Well, the first one would be, you're talking, Mr. Chairman, about starting with the regulated use table.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
Okay, so the first one would be boarding and rooming houses.
And the way we read this notation is it is allowed, but only in R1C, is that right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's
it's only permitted in RM.
only permitted in the RM.
So I think oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was gonna say in the 1C district, the R1C district, it's a special use.
Special, okay. But the C means R1C.
1C.
Okay,
So yeah, boarding and rooming houses are special land use approval in R1C or R2, it looks like.
Yeah.
And then a permitted use in RM. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct.
Jen?
So John, is the term boarding and rooming houses, is that a standard thing nowadays?
No,
I haven't seen this anywhere else. And so that's my point is, what is it and why do we have it?
because it's currently in your code.
Right, but how did it get there? Did it should still stay there? Or is there a smarter way to go about this?
Well, what you could do is on any of these uses. I mean, I've done ordinances before where they had umbrella repair shops. Okay, that date back to the 20s. So I mean, at some point, you gotta go through and kind of sanitize the uses. I mean, boarding houses and rooming houses were big back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
But they're not around it. I mean, that's your Airbnbs.
Yeah, well, because I think this was, I could be wrong, but I think this was created a way to help to control, back in the day when Harbor didn't look positively on additional accessory dwellings or things like that, where they didn't want that type of thing. So I think this was put in place years ago as a control mechanism. But I think it's not useful anymore. It's just confusing. That's my opinion on it. Because I've never seen this in any other.
Am I
zoning
correct
ordinance.
that if something isn't mentioned in the zoning code, then it's not permitted?
Correct.
Am I right?
If the cell is blank,
Then it's not.
it's not permitted in there.
So if you take it out, then it wouldn't be permitted.
Well, the question is, what is it giving us that is beneficial to the city? And does that fit in somewhere else in a more
I think
modern
those
way?
are bad terms for
Yeah, they
nowadays. I
are,
totally
but
agree.
is it beneficial anyway for us, or is it detrimental to some of the things we've been talking about doing?
Well, this has come up before where, because when we look at single family districts, we have a definition for what a single family is. And if somebody wants to use a home in a residential neighborhood as something other than single family, then we have to look at what use would be permitted or not permitted there. And this has come up before for property owners that wanted to have some type of housing where it's non-related people living in a home. In a situation where, for instance, the boarding and rooming houses come up with the clubs in town, like the Little Harbor Club with their employee housing. Maybe we change the name of it from boarding and rooming house to employee housing or something, but in situations where you want to have a home that's available for non-related to people to live in it, renting rooms individually or some such. And I believe the difference between boarding and rooming, one of them insinuates that meals are being cooked and prepped by let's say a homeowner or somebody that lives at the property that maintains it, or the other people that are there, whether they're guests or employees. That's been the historical use of it. If we want to change that, call it something else, or create another path for that, or eliminate it, that would be a good discussion topic.
Would a bed and breakfast fall under that?
We have a different term right underneath boarding houses for bed and breakfast.
So,
I think one thing we have to be mindful of, and I'm not for or against this, is referring back to the master plan and what we said, you all said you wanted with housing in this town. Because we talk about across the total spectrum, and I mean, I think whenever we make a change, we need to be mindful of how that relates back to it.
Right, and that's what makes me think about this, and the term you said just a little bit ago, I guess let's just check the validity of it. What everybody feels about it, but it's like, do we want to control whether people are related living in a house or not related living in a house? It sort of comes back to that. Is that something is still meaningful?
What's
today
the
for us?
definition of a family nowadays?
Exactly.
I can't give you.
Yeah, I mean, is that something
Yeah.
that to me seems antiquated?
Yeah.
But, that's just my opinion.
We expanded our definition quite substantially a couple of years ago, to better align with modern families. Our old one was very outdated. And we actually determined, I think, we had a pending issue that kind of brought it to a head.
Okay.
I do think it's important that we have some type of definition, because you want to make sure that you have some level of control that you want to keep. We had a scenario 4 or 5 years ago where we had a business owner in town that purchased a home and had upwards of 25 to 30 people living in the home.
Oh, I remember that one.
So if you don't define what a family is, then you can't say what a family isn't. That would then be a violation. Right? And so if we didn't have a definition of what a single family is, we wouldn't have been able to tell that person that's not applicable in that neighborhood. You can't do that. So I think some of it comes from that. That's also part of the reason why we had to fix our definition, was so that it would be more legally enforceable, I guess.
Okay, that makes some sense. I understand.
And John, these uses all came from our existing code. And so therefore, we're really still running with the same definitions that they carry in the existing code. So if we don't like a definition, we'll need to redo those too. I wonder if the best thing at this point, here we are on the first or the second one, and we've already gone pretty deep. I wonder if the best thing is to make some notes about things that would require some future study and some deeper thinking. And just take more of a buzz through this and identify those things, and then maybe figure out how we attack that, maybe with, a subcommittee, or with, John and Jeff's advice. Does that sound like a good thing? Okay, it looks like we might have a request for public comment at this point. Folks like to open it up to that?
Well, I only wanted to suggest, since I'm a user, I'm sorry, Michael Esposito from Irish Boat Shop. Since I'm a user on the other side of this table, I went through to compare what was in the current zoning code with what's on your table. And this is certainly not a criticism of anyone's work, but seems to me the first thing to go through would be to see, do they actually match? Because I would say they don't. And just in little places, if you start going through this, you're using this document, which may or may not represent the old one. So it seems like the first thing to do for you at the table to feel comfortable that everything's been translated correctly. I only looked at 2 districts because that's what I'm involved in, and I got a lot of red ink on here.
Okay, great. Trying to think if that's the best use for the group's time.
Sorry, that's just something.
Yeah, so okay, that's a great catch. I'd be inclined to just try to make some notes at this point. That would be one of the first ones, about action items that we need to take. And, we'll capture also, questions about, like Mark just raised regarding, is this definition or is this use still valid? Does that sound good?
Mhm.
All right, so who wants to do our capturing? Jeff? Is it,
Or wedding?
capturing the issues that we want to dig into, or the action items that,
Yeah, if we want to run through these, and if you guys want to
Yeah.
holler out,
that's what I'm
like,
thinking.
even if it's just a quick, these look good, or this one needs some changes, then John and I can go back and modify this for a future,
Yeah, well, let's
update.
capture them first, and we'll figure out how to attack. All right, so the first thing I heard that Michael mentioned is, let's do a double check on completeness of the new draft compared to the existing zoning code. All right, then I heard raising the question of, is boarding and rooming houses still a use that we want to accommodate or to even mention? Is it still
Or should it
valid?
just have another term,
Or is there a better name?
like
Better-
employee
better
housing?
employee housing. Okay. Jeff, you got those two?
Yeah.
Okay, what else, as we go? Bed and breakfast? Anybody?
It's pretty straightforward.
Straightforward.
What's the difference between cluster housing and condominium development?
Yeah.
Is cluster housing, that's just like smaller scaled lots, and condominium is common wall, common property type stuff?
So
Is that a normal separation to have? Because you're increasing density.
condominium is actually a form of real estate ownership.
Yeah.
It's not really a form of building development.
Do we have any cluster housing in town?
I guess I don't know exactly what
Bay
the
Street
definition
cottages.
is.
Those are condos.
Condominium is,
associations.
again, it's a form of organization.
Yeah.
There's really, the difference is how are you plotting out and planning your subdivision? Are you going through the subdivision act and creating your lots in your neighborhood, or are you going through the condominium act? So condominium development can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be, and that's gonna be our path for processing things. That could mean one building that has condominium units within it, such as the bank building, the New York building, various other buildings in town, or it could mean a subdivision that has yards and houses on it, such as
All those ones over there on Third Street, right?
between Second and Third
Yeah.
Street, the project that we looked at before, where there's actual lots. Cluster housing is more a different thing of, I think, the number of units that you have in a given area. Right?
There's a greater density.
And with way to come up with higher density. And there's projects that, and I don't know because I wasn't here at the time, but I'm gonna make some guesses of where we would have done some cluster housing ideas. One example is probably the Bay Street cottages that the cottage company has done. You know, where that is condominiumized and it's a higher density of homes on very small lots with small homes there, and then the garage units or the whatnot. And then also potentially another area that was done back in the late 80s, early 90s, Widmere Pines might have been something along that line, where they did a little bit of higher density.
Do we have a definition of cluster housing in the zone?
I don't actually see that. Yeah. Okay, so we got another one to explore.
So, but those two things, it seems like between those two, I understand what the intent is.
But it's
I think-
confusing. When is one a condominium development, one is one a cluster, and that's where I get confused. Because cluster housing can occur with a special use in two, but condominium can only happen in one, but yet you can have cluster be condominium.
Well, your ordinance says that cluster development in R1 and R2 districts, subject to the conditions set forth in Article 22 of the chapter. And Article 22 is your planned unit development.
So all this can come under planned unit development. Perhaps.
Yeah, I
Because
think,
that's like,
I
if you
think,
look at Emmett County's, or has, you know, they have a really good planned unit development, section, you know, where they go through everything and lay it all out. So could some of these just default to that, instead of having to read in one section and have to go to another to find out what it really means?
yeah, I think with the way the ordinance is set up, it's saying that if you're gonna do a cluster development, then you're gonna have to do a planned unit development.
Yeah.
So, but there's not a definition in the ordinance of what a cluster housing is. I think that's the missing part. Okay.
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 Because
So I'm gonna note that we could potentially condense clusters, condos, PUDs.
Yeah.
Into one.
Mhm.
All right, good. Next one is guest quarters.
Well, but again, though, but we have to have these things are named, because the PUD, that's sort of like a mechanism by which to make something happen. And you can do that in different forms. So I still think that as far as calling out what the use is, is that correct to have a PUD as a use? Or do we still need something like a definition for cluster
You need a
housing or
definition.
multifamily
Yes,
and all that kind of stuff? So we still have to have those.
yes.
Yeah, we just can't, I don't know if you're saying that or not, but I mean, because the PUD is a mechanism. You know,
It's
a
a plan.
method, you know, that we use to achieve certain things.
A process versus a
Process.
use.
Yeah, thank you.
Right,
Yeah,
and some of these may be processes as opposed to uses.
So the kicker here may be just having a definition of what your definition of cluster housing is.
so it would be cluster housing. Could multifamily fall into cluster housing?
Yeah.
You get multifamilies.
Well,
Clusters.
yeah, I mean, cluster housing is basically, the concept is under the state statute, because it's allowed in rural areas, is taking the same number of housing, let's say you had a piece of property that was 10 acres. And you were allowed to put one house on a half an acre, so you get 20 houses. It allows you to take those 20 houses and cluster them tighter together in order to create open space or protect a natural feature. That's what cluster housing is.
I think we need that.
So definition should align with statute whenever possible.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, that's
Oh, who's the threat?
what we're here for. All right, guest quarters. A thought on guest quarters. So I think from our last meeting was to consider a definition for accessory dwelling units and where those might fit in and how those might fit in.
Can I just back up one thing? You have condominium development as a special use only in the RM district.
Right,
And as Jeff had mentioned, condominium is a process, not a use.
right.
So my recommendation is we take condominium out as a use.
Should be used, yeah.
So we just strike it out of the.
I agree. It doesn't,
Yeah.
it's just confusing when it sits there and it's not even with anyone else. It's supposed
I
to be.
think that's a clear example of where, as our code has evolved and changed, things have gotten complicated and we've got things that don't match up. Because we have another section that talks about whenever you're splitting property into more than 3 properties or parcels, you will condominiumize. So, you know, regardless of what neighborhood you're doing it in, you would be pushed into a condominium as opposed to a specific use in a specific neighborhood.
Okay. We should look at that when we come to it. All right, guest quarters do people agree that we want to take another look at
Yeah.
a new structure for EDUs and how those would fit in and really take an overall look at that? Okay, great. Home occupations are only allowed in special use in C. Let's see. So home occupations are not permitted.
Somebody tell me a definition of that
Yeah.
nowadays.
Okay, let's talk about home occupations in today's post-COVID
Right.
world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just about 80% of my staff work at home, which is a home occupation.
Correct.
You work at home?
Yes, I do.
See?
Well, wait, maybe not. Um, yes, I work at home.
Okay. So that's, I think a lot of communities are foregoing the one person at home occupation, and they only have a home occupation if there's 2 or more employees, because that's where you may have an impact in the neighborhood with people coming in and parking and a lot of traffic going in and out. So, you know, if I'm a planner and I'm working at home, okay, I'm working at home. I mean, I have an office at home, right? Some of us have offices at home. So why do we need special approval to do that?
But it's when you have clients that come
But it's
over.
when you have employees or you have a business where it depends on constant client contact, like having a home occupation as a beauty salon. Okay? That's a business. So I think you got to make that differentiation at this time in the ordinance.
Yeah.
In terms of really what is a home occupation. And it should be one that either generates clients that come to your home or where you have more than one employee.
Otherwise, it just is, you can do what you want in your own home.
And
Right.
we have, it's pretty well spelled out in our zoning code. I'm trying to see if I can pull it up here real quick, but we have some requirements of the extent that a home occupation can exist. Such as you can have employees, but not more than a certain number, and they should be related to you type of a thing, or the limitation on the sale of products that are related to your business, such as, for instance, if you have a hair salon at home, it could be you and maybe one other person, with the limitation that the only products that you sell are related to, so you can sell shampoos or conditioners, things like that. And a limitation on the amount of parking that you could have and the amount of signage that you could have, so that it's not changing the neighborhood feel so that it looks like there's a business in a residential district. That would be where we would get into it. And that's probably another good example of where maybe we could change things to not require a special land use, as it is becoming much more typical that people have home occupations, especially the ones that are small scale, where let's say it's just me working out of an office in my house. Do we really want to tell somebody that they need to come in for a special land use request if everything is being contained inside and there's no people that really visiting them for their business?
Yeah, so that would be set up so that you have to get over a certain limit, over a certain bar, and then you fall into the definition of home occupation. Like employees and people coming in and you're selling product and stuff like that.
Yeah, because right now your definition of home occupation is an occupation or profession customarily carried on by an occupant of the dwelling unit as a secondary use.
What does that mean?
That's what your definition is.
The house is being used as an office. by clients.
Profession customarily carried on by the occupant of the dwelling. I don't know what that means, but that's what your definition is.
Yeah, well, we're gonna change it.
Get that on the list.
Yep, Jeff, you got that on the list? Home occupations?
I've circled it in the code.
Okay, John, you're. Okay, manufactured homes and manufactured home products.
Do we have definitions of manufactured
It's
homes?
not a use. It's a thing.
It's a thing. A manufactured home is a thing.
I think
You do not have a definition for it.
I think this is a blend of not just uses, but also things, because we do specify where manufactured homes can be in other ways, like like the mobile home park, as opposed to allowing a manufactured home of that type just anywhere in the city. Or that might be something carried over that's not applicable anymore with the update on the quality of mobile homes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, manufactured homes are different and they're really getting nice. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
It's more of a building method than.
It really is. It's a kit. It makes housing more affordable. You can get some really nice ones. One just went in over by Aldica. That is a manufactured home.
It isn't, Mark, I think under the state construction code, a manufactured home has to meet the current construction code, whereas a mobile home has to meet the HUD requirements.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
they
the,
have different.
that's the
requirements.
difference.
Yeah, so a manufactured home, they do meet all the standard requirements. They just, come in and components.
And there's a lot of those actually in town.
And why, I guess, do we only let them in those areas?
Yeah, I should probably say mobile homes. I think that's what we're getting at here.
Yeah, if we don't mean manufactured homes, we mean mobile homes, then it should be mobile homes and mobile home parks.
Well, you have a classification called MHP, which is mobile home park.
Oh,
Okay, so. And you have definitions. For a mobile home and a mobile home park. but you call it manufactured houses. So
Oh,
you may want to change manufactured homes to
Right,
mobile.
mobile
homes.
homes, exactly.
got a note on that
Well,
one?
that cleans that up.
Yep,
Good, okay. Multifamily dwellings, duplexes, apartment, townhomes.
Well, let's go back a second.
All right.
But do we even have to have that in there though? Because we can just, can't that just be a. Since we have the. MHP zoning district, and that can be the only place where mobile homes are allowed, period. You know, because we don't even have to have mobile homes on there, it's not a use, it's a thing again.
Well, again, we need to have a definition for it,
Yeah,
and
Mobile
then we
home.
need to,
You have a definition.
yeah, and then we would need to specify where that's permitted or not permitted.
But we don't need manufactured home in there at all.
We probably just need to update and change it from
okay,
manufactured.
well, I'm okay with that for now.
So the house.
so I see what you're saying, and manufactured home parks is a use that is only in the zoning of the mobile home park.
You need to change mobile home. Manufactured in both class. You need to have a mobile home and then a mobile home park,
Okay,
because that's what's in
They need to
your.
match.
That's what, that's what
goes,
you're-
manufactured goes away everywhere.
And then the question is, I think I heard, was do you want to allow, if you have a mobile home park, why do you want to allow mobile homes in the R1 and the R2 district?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd want to just have them in the mobile home
Right.
park.
Okay.
So you may want to get rid of, just strike out the manufactured home line altogether.
That's my point.
And then have a mobile home park and only allow them in your
Yes,
MHP district.
yes,
Bingo.
Okay, that's simple.
Easily understood.
because they should be nowhere else, because that's what they are.
Have no place for
Yeah.
them.
Okay, moving on to multifamily dwellings of duplexes, apartments, townhomes. They are permitted uses in R2 for the duplex. And permitted uses in multi. Looks like duplexes are permitted many places. So here's a big one. Many communities are looking at a new concept of allowing duplexes in every neighborhood. And some communities are focusing more on the look of it, the size, the building envelope, not the number of front doors or mailboxes. And so that would be a big one for us. That's a big one for many communities that are thinking about.
That's a whole movement of eliminating single family.
It's part of it, yeah.
That's the basis of it, right? Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's tough. So that would be a big one that would require quite a lot of thinking and discussion. And I don't know enough. I don't have a position on that and don't quite know how to attack that.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, you hosted that meeting downtown at the loft where this was discussed. And if I remember, the community was open to the idea. But I think the key was how to figure out a ways to allow it in some situations without that becoming the norm. Right? Does that seem like your recollection of that meeting? I'm not
Yeah.
remembering this incorrectly.
We showed some images of different housing structures and people were very supportive of good looking dudes and weren't scared by that necessarily.
Well, don't we have some duplexes now, except we call them condominiums? On Main Street, aren't there?
Well, and those are in the R2 district, the south side of Main Street, along this area, we have a number of duplexes. And those are in R2 zoning districts, which permits that. Similarly, between Wallstrom's and the Demers apartment building home, there's some duplexes along there, again, in an R2 district. So it's a permitted use there by right.
Why is it on the south side, I mean, I understand the zoning, but why not the north side? How was that?
Because that was the breakdown of the zoning districts at some point in time. I don't know the reason. This could, you know. We made a change we created a method for extra accessory buildings for certain properties. That if they met certain requirements, that they could get a special land use to have, what, you know, because normally we limit accessory buildings to no more than 2. But we said that if you have more than a certain amount of property, you could do a special land use for a 3rd building. And maybe something along that line might be a way to answer this thought, that potentially duplexes in R1 neighborhoods would be permitted if you met certain requirements that we spelled out and then approved through special land use process. If you'd like, we could maybe draft up something that might work for that.
Well, it seems like, you know, sort of, I just go back to, why don't we just let the size of the lot determine the size of the building? And what goes on within that buildable area is just left up to what's allowed. And, it comes down to, people making something work, whether it's a 100-foot wide lot or a 200-foot wide lot, it's only gonna allow a certain type of buildings in there. And it's really up to, it's up to the designer, just to make that whole process, make it work as in one building. And so just to try to keep it simple, maybe we just let that be the guide, if we decide we want to do it, instead of adding additional regulations on top of something.
Devil's advocate. If you open it up like that, there will be people that, from my experience as a zoning administrator, don't put forward the same level of procedure in putting together something nice. And they say, this is what I can do and get away with much less design aspect to it. And say, I can fit this on, I can make it fit.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
That's a whole nother issue though.
Yeah.
It is.
So,
And I think you're gonna get kickback on some of these duplexes, you allow it and, this residential. People are gonna see a duplex go up, it's gonna be short-term rental, now all of a sudden, instead of 1 short-term rental, you got 2 short-term rentals right next to you.
Yeah, I think we're pushing a lot of things already. And maybe that's one, maybe that's maybe a poison pill that we stay away from. For now.
Yeah, I don't know how to attack it. I would have
It's a
a whole lot
complex
more to
one.
learn about it and more research that, I'd like to see studies and see what other cities are doing before I went down that track.
I know that, like you mentioned, Emmett County, I believe, has proposed that all neighborhoods would be.
They did,
They did enact that, yeah.
Yeah.
We could wait and see for a year or 2 how that works in the rural county. And revisit it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of I think a good thing, I like it's progressive and deals with a lot of issues that we have. But at the same time, just this community, I think you get pretty strong pushback from. Doesn't mean we can't do it. Does it make sense to maybe allow duplexes in one of the other, in one more higher residential, other than multifamily? Is there another residential district we could slide it in to try it and see if it works?
How much of the city is R1? I should know this, 90-some%? Am I correct?
R1 is.
So if we're gonna have any impact at all, we have to do some, in terms of housing, we have to do something in the R1 districts.
Yeah.
If they're 90% of the city.
Well, if we're allowing, if we're gonna open up the accessory dwelling units, we're sort of doing that. It's sort of like they're, in a way, we are getting 2 living units on 1 lot just by doing that. And that's a lot. For people who want to incur that. So in some ways we're doing that already.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do one or the other.
Mm.
In some of the zones, if you do both, you're opening up a lot of. But so much of the city is R1 that, you know, that's where the impact is in the R1 districts.
Maybe this is just maybe a side question, John, but if someone chooses to do an accessory dwelling unit that's attached to their home, what's the difference between that and a duplex?
Nothing.
Nothing really.
Yeah.
As long, if the accessory dwelling unit has an exterior entrance, then it would be a duplex.
Yeah, so we're kind of potentially even going about it in that
That way.
process anyway.
Sort of our.
Yeah. Yeah, my thought would be to hold on, you know, this big change. Let's take a look at how we come down on the accessory dwelling units. And how that comes together, and see if we think
Because maybe
we can make an impact that way.
yeah, we can slide this stuff into there.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. Residential connected to office or service.
That's only permitted in your off your general office district, and that the title up at the top says ROS, it should be 01 0-1. That's the only area that in the city where that's allowed is in your general office district.
And that's pretty specific. It's basically the north side of Lake Street between, I believe, Ottawa and Hoyt is where that district is.
Oh.
So those properties on the north side of the road there.
And that happened because somebody had a special request, right, up there? I mean, that's
I
a
think-
funky little district.
Well, I think that district it's been in existence forever. I think that really what happened was back in 1976, when we were adopting our districts, we kind of looked at what are uses that are already there and what uses might expand in an area. On that north side of the road there, we had in existence, there was the party store in front of the mobile home park. Right next to that was is it the Juliette's building that there's been businesses in for a long time? Benchmark Engineering has always been on that north side of the road. Right on the corner of Lake and Ottawa he was a fee appraiser. Can't remember.
Are any of them actively have a residence there along with the business?
There are some residential uses throughout along that.
Yeah, but connected to a business though, because I know there's still residential there, but it's all mixed together.
I
But-
think
but there's I don't think there is one.
the building where the barber shop is, and there's some offices on the first floor and then residences above.
Yeah, those are short-term rentals.
Are they?
Yeah,
Mhm.
they're all short-term rentals there. That's the only one that I knew at the time, and even the one just to the east of there. I think that has an apartment above. That one does have an apartment above, but those are just apartments, they're not part of, it's not like the owner's living there with a business.
Yeah, when I look at-
They're actually businesses, they're creating income for those properties.
Yeah,
It's
well,
not commercial.
Yeah, when I looked at that, I tried finding it in the district. It reminded me when I was a kid, my barber that I used to go to as a kid had a little shop in front of his house. And during the day, he was in the barber shop, and then he would open the door and go in the house at night. But that was a house, that was an office or a small business that was directly
Yeah.
connected to where he lived.
Dentists do that a lot. So do CPAs.
So are we saying this probably isn't applicable? in-
Yeah.
It may not be.
I
It may not
don't
be.
think you are, because all those are all income properties along there. I know some of the guys who own them now, and okay, they're all income.
Some of them are, and I guess the key is some of them are just the whole property is business, but then some of them scattered within are residential homes. Like right on the other, between Windmere and the mobile home park, there's a single family house.
Right.
Right in the end of Ottawa on the corner,
Yes.
that's pretty much a single family house now.
Yes.
On the other end, on the corner of Lake and Hoyt, you've got a single family house with then basically a guest quarter or an apartment in the garage that's been converted.
Right.
So I think you have different uses throughout. There's less blend of multiple uses going on one property, but a scattering of different types of uses between properties.
It's just mixed use,
Absolutely.
that's all it is.
Okay, so we probably don't need that. So,
Yeah, the residential connected, that's outdated.
all right,
It's a mixed use.
Okay, let's talk about the next one, residential units on upper floors of buildings.
Those are all allowed in your commercial districts.
Yeah,
You want to get to.
but does that make sense, or is that?
Yeah, I think it's very desirable.
Very
Should it be-
desirable.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I agree. Should it be broader though? Should it be allowed in more places, or is it not even applicable in other places?
I think in other places, it's understood that it's happening anyway. I don't think we need to specify in single family residential districts that you can use your second floor as residential.
Yeah,
I think it's specifically spelled out in CBD V1 and V2 because residential use is not permitted on the first floor. That's why it is specified that it is permitted on the second floor.
got it. Thank you. Okay. Single family dwellings.
John, can you tell me why a single family dwelling is allowed in an RM district? In a multiple residential district?
It's typical sometimes that
Is
you can
it
have single
legally-
family and a multiple family.
Is it
district.
legally mandated that we do that?
No,
No. I just think that's eroded some of it. We have hardly any RM in this town at all. And what we have had, they've been taken over by single family houses. And once that single family house is there, then even if it remains an RM, it's never used that way. So that's just my concern with if it should be a permitted use in RM. Just a thought.
If the goal is more RM, then I think we would need to expand where our RM districts are to allow them in more areas.
Well, it depends if we want affordable housing. I mean, that's about the only way to
see
do
it in your RM district, the permitted uses are all the permitted uses that are currently in the R1B district, which would be single family.
Right.
Apartments, townhouses, multifamily, and two-family buildings. So the RM district brings
big stuff.
brings the single family with it. So, but that's a policy decision, you know.
It's also driven by the economics of it too.
Mhm.
You know, because if you have that zoning, most people are gonna put in something that produces income versus a single family house.
But not in this town, they have. I mean, in general, the RM, some of the districts, some of the pieces have turned into single family homes. I mean, right next door to us, that was RM. And there was a single family home on it because.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And I don't think that's the only piece. That's the one I'm most familiar with, but what was Demers property is an RM. Isn't it? Am I right, Jeff?
Well, it was. So we really only had RM in two locations that I can think of off the top of my head. And really, again, this goes back to, I think, 1976-ish, when we, created our current zoning map and zoning districts. If you look at what was here at that time in the city, in the 1970s, we had the Hillside Apartments. And so we took that existing property and said, it's already being used as residential multiple. So let's make that a residential multiple district. And then we took the property on the north side of Bay Street, where on the corner we had a hotel or a motel. And then the Demers property at that time was an apartment building that I think had 4 or 6 units in it. And so we said, that's probably the other area where we have RM. And I think the thought was that RM might expand and that there would be more. So they took some of the properties between the apartment building and the motel and said, we're going to call those RM, even though they had existing single family homes on them, thinking that the trend would be that those would become, that somebody might buy them up and put in more multiple residential properties. And the reality was it went the other direction. The motel went out. Cottage Company did the Bay Street Cottages project. The apartment building turned into a single family residential home. And it went the opposite direction that we thought. And there might be one other area that's RM
There's hardly
There's
any.
hardly any, yeah.
And I think part of the reason is because we've allowed single family homes to go.
Right.
And therefore we've lost that RM.
Well, I think realistically, there were already single family homes there.
Oh, I know there were. I know on some of them there were, not Demers, but some of them, but by allowing it, we've encouraged it in this town. That's the way. What is the Baptist church property? Isn't that RM? Is it RM or R2
Where is that?
on Main Street?
Well, that's on Main Street on the south side. That's in the R2 district.
Because there's some RM still in there, but it's minimal. It's just a concern that, you know, we've got so much R1 already that I just think we need to be aware.
Would it be normal, John, not to have single family and a multifamily?
It's usually allowed.
It usually is allowed.
It usually is allowed.
Okay. Then we have a whole bunch of state licensed residential facilities here. Anybody see anything in that we can change, or is this? And is this still a valid
State statute.
state
Yeah.
statute?
There's a typo on it.
You got.
Yeah.
moved around. Yeah, this is a protected class under the zoning enabling act.
Okay. And we are compliant with
Yeah.
that the way it
But
stands?
where it's showing permitted, that's what's required.
Okay.
Skip over
Did
that.
they just
All right.
update that? I think I saw some recent legislation that had new things that were permitted by right uses in residential.
Yeah, did it get
neighborhoods.
approved? It was in, last time I looked, it was in committee.
Yeah, Mary Riley with the MSU extension sent out
She did.
she sent out a thing.
They got it.
Yeah. So that list may have expanded by one or two more.
All right. You guys will pick that up for us.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Next thing is 2 dwelling units on the same lot. What do we make of that?
Conflict.
That created, that they came into existence actually fairly recently. That has not been permitted in the past. And the property specifically that created this use category is that house on the corner of Lake and Hoyt.
Okay.
That was way back in the day, a residential home with a detached garage. At some point, I think we figured out historically back in the 1990s, the garage was converted into an apartment building, which was then made available for rent. And we created that basically to, I think, partially to bring that property into compliance. It's in that ROS district that somebody could, essentially it's a way to, I guess, a method for a piece of, or a portion of a property that we used to consider guest quarters that wasn't in compliance with the code because it wasn't allowed in that district, for them to be able to rent that out on a permanent basis.
Could this one be replaced by whatever ADU approach we take?
I
Sounds
think
like it.
so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Or has it say to primary dwelling units not allowed in one lot
Makes sense.
versus, accessory dwelling units.
All right, well, let's make a note. We may not even need
May
it,
not even-
depending on what we
This
do.
could probably be scrapped if we develop, depending on how we develop our ADU section.
All right, next section is community uses. Anything trigger a thought on these things? Oh, here's where we have planned unit developments.
I'm curious, why is that in, community uses?
I have no idea. Yeah,
That doesn't make sense.
all right. Well, let's make a note of that one.
What's the difference between cemeteries and municipal cemeteries?
Who gets buried there?
Ownership.
I don't know. Probably ownership. If it's a municipal cemetery, it's like we have the cemetery that is managed by an authority and it's.
But it's
owned
all
by-
still the
But it's
same
also-
use. Dead people are buried in the ground.
But a private cemetery that is owned by you and your family is a different scenario with different level of maintenance and care. And different management than a public cemetery.
Okay,
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
Didn't know that. What's the charitable institutions thing, and that's only allowed in transition? What is that?
I think we got the definitions for that.
And how many of those trans TRs do we have?
Transitional residential, so that primarily that district is on the north side of Bay Street.
Okay,
There's, if you're right along Zorn Park,
Yeah.
the north side of it, there's that alley that's there. There's some residential homes that are along that alley. Those are in the transitional residential neighborhood.
Okay.
And then once you get past the bank on Bay Street and you continue heading east from the bank, the properties on the north side of the road there are in the transitional, like where the Sipinski used to be,
Yeah.
and those other properties that go along that direction. Those are the transitional residential homes.
what do charitable institutions have to do with that area?
We have a couple charitable institutions there, I believe. There's the yacht club. Not sure, I'm not sure if they fall into that category, but I know we have a, I know we have.
Like that.
I know that might not be the right, that might not be the right,
Sounds like a use.
but I know that they're there and they're not like a residential, single family home or a duplex
All
situation.
right, let's,
They-
charitable institutions is questionable, right? We don't have a definition, we don't know what it is, so.
It seems like if we had them, there'd be in the business districts.
Yeah,
Anything else, and again, planned unit developments only in the R1E. That's questionable. If we need that still.
I see a private club. Private
Yeah, there's
clubs,
your
lodges.
private club.
There's the yacht club.
there's the yacht club.
Okay, anything else? Oh, question, yes, Michael.
Municipal buildings and parking lots. Don't you have those in the waterfront district? Ward Park, Harbor Masters Building.
Those properties are, I believe, in the community district. I'm not positive. You get the map up?
I mean, that's
They're in
the question about the
district.
map. I don't know. I'm not questioning. I'm just saying that I think they're there. So
We'll
there's,
look into that, yeah.
and the other one was, well, I'll let you get there. Oh, boathouses. Is the boathouse a club? What is the boathouse?
Condominium.
The condominium.
What is that in the waterfront?
A boathouse or the boathouse?
Whatever Wallstrom's is now, the old Wallstrom's is called.
I think it's
Boathouse.
condominium.
It's a boatominium, isn't it?
It's a condominium.
I really don't know exactly what it is. You gotta be a member to be there, so I think it's a club,
Yeah,
but I don't know.
I think it is.
That's waterfront.
Which would just mean that it would, private clubs, if it's a club or whatever it is, may have to also be allowed in the waterfront district. Or you can shut them down.
Which one?
Either one.
And which waterfront district is that in? Is it WF or WF1?
I view out the map, isn't, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good catch.
And I guess while I'm saying it, public parks are also in the waterfront district.
Yeah.
Lots of them, which is awesome. Although I'm not sure why you wouldn't allow public parks in all zoning districts.
Same thing for nature preserve.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they should just allowed.
That should be a delete that category.
Yeah,
I agree.
okay.
John, you're saying delete what?
Nature preserve.
And put public parks wherever.
And then, the other part of it is,
How would you want to-
the other, I would agree that, I don't know why a park's not allowed in every district.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, moving on, radio and television towers.
Um, Where is our M1?
That's, M1 would be our manufacturing district. That's pretty much just on Hoyt Street as you head north of Lake. Where the Wallstrom storage buildings are. There might be some more,
At Fairview.
yeah, I was just gonna say on Fairview, there might be some.
What are radio and television towers? are
Realistically,
those?
that's a section,
That's the stuff that's on top of the school, I think, on top of the bluff.
I mean,
A whole bunch of
I mean,
stuff
it's
up
not
there.
even radio and television towers anymore. It's towers. And it's on the school,
yeah,
and the school isn't in that district.
If this is,
there's,
I wonder about the religious institutions and schools, why there's such conflict between where schools can be and where religious institutions can be. Schools are only allowed in special uses, and I don't even know if the school is in that S1. I think the high schools.
well, I think, again, we have to make sure that we're differentiating between a public or private school.
Right,
Public schools, my understanding is that they're kind of exempt from zoning. We can't really tell them what to do.
then we should put
But-
private.
Yeah.
And then what do you do when the radio and television towers are on public schools?
Those aren't radio and television towers, those are cell towers.
There are no radio and television towers.
Radio waves.
you got a radio tower right over on 131 at Anderson. Right there at the corner by where Lowe's is at.
So what
That's,
if,
was that 90, what's the radio station?
Yeah.
There's no large radio tower, it's 300 feet tall.
There's a radio tower north of Harbor Springs also.
Or don't you have a-
but what if a cell tower, what if somebody wanted to come in and put a cell tower onto a park?
See, that's the difficulty when you start talking about other types of towers. There's a lot of different rules and regulations that affect our ability to even do anything with them. And cell towers, I think, are a good example. To some extent, the need for coverage is beyond the scope of what we as a community get to determine. And that's kind of determined by the federal government. They say that if a cell tower needs to come in and be in this location, there's not a whole lot that we can do to say no. Same thing with, another example is, I think, like ham radio towers, they're federally protected. If somebody wanted to come in and say, I'm a ham radio operator, I want to do this, we have limited ability to tell them yes or no. Whereas with radio and television, I think we have
Okay.
more scope of what we can do, right? And
Okay,
that's, I
because
think.
the
key there.
government's not into that. They're just into the,
Well, they are, but it's not a protected class.
It's,
okay,
they're all protected to different levels and in different ways. We still may have some ability to have some involvement. But we just, sometimes we can't say no, but we can say yes, but you've got to do it this way type of a thing.
or in these locations.
Well, some of them, we can tell them locations. Like, okay, I'm guessing that because we've specified radio and television, we maybe have the ability with radio and television to say yes, but only here.
We don't have that with cell towers.
I don't think we do, no.
They can just put it wherever they want.
I think so.
Okay.
And then the 5G network now is, the state legislature considers 5G towers public utilities, so now they can locate in the right of way with
Yeah.
very little,
Okay.
very
Okay.
little oversight.
Yeah.
How do you spell lobbyist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
All right, let's move on to commercial uses then. Anybody see anything in here that,
This is just where I'll just make a point, because a lot between the B1 and B2, a lot of the differences in uses between B1 and B2 is that B2, that's where all the auto uses go. That's just the way it's set up right now. That's one of the main differences between the two. And so we have down below the bluff where we don't want to have the auto stuff. That's where most is B1, but then we just have some B2 down here as well. And then there's more B2 up on top of the bluff.
B2, would be like, I think primarily where that's at is like the IGA,
Right.
the Harbor Springs Car Care.
Yep.
There's the insurance company, I think, that's up there, the car wash. So there's some of that. And then I
So-
think the Fairview Plaza is in that as well.
Yeah. Since we're here, this is commercial uses, that's one of the primary differences between the B1 and B2 is auto uses.
So I struggle with the major repair, the minor repair, and then the ones that are just further down that is just overall automobile service stations. Is that gas stations?
That used to be the term for a gas station.
What's the new term for a gas station?
Gas
station.
I sort of knew that. Who knows what we're gonna put that on?
I just throw out there, do we really want
Still a
to
service station.
not allow any cafes, bakeries, any small businesses anywhere except where they're allowed here? You know, we've talked to, you guys have in the past have talked about some mixed uses and stuff. I kind of hate to totally rule that out at this point. I think it's something we should look at.
Uses, okay.
Some of the commercial uses that are not, you know, unpleasant to have next door or whatever, I think, rather than confining, we don't have much commercial in this town either. So I think we need to look at, are any of these uses that might be okay outside of a commercial zone? And maybe even be good outside of a commercial zone.
Like a drinking establishment?
That'd be great. A small cafe, a small bakery. I mean, there could be some really neat uses in some of the residential neighborhoods, I think.
Yeah.
And like Barry said, daycare, childcare centers aren't allowed at all. Looks like.
Why do we even have it in here?
Why
So
don't
we
we-
can state that it's not permitted.
Oh, boy.
And
Okay.
why don't we have them? I mean,
Why don't we have childcare centers?
yeah.
Is that bad? I mean, is that?
I mean, seriously, I know.
With your jobs? What's going on here?
You don't want any families that don't have any childcare centers.
Well, it is a
It's like,
huge-
killed it at the playground, so we just can't do things.
But seriously, some of this is pretty outdated and pretty.
It's very
Yeah, the,
outdated.
yeah, the
Controlling
child
of
care
what-
centers.
Yeah.
Can we rework all of these?
Yeah.
Just go through and make modern uses and terms, fit them in the proper places.
Try to reduce some.
How much
Well,
of that would
I-
you like to do versus having us do, I guess is the question.
Well, I'd like,
Well, I could have some.
I mean, Vanessa's correct. What's the difference between major and minor repair?
Right, exactly.
Right.
All right, so it sounds like what we're coming to is all these commercial uses are ripe for reducing and modernizing the definitions. And Nancy brought up, you know, are there some uses that we would want to expand where those could be done? Things that aren't disruptive, things that could actually be pleasant.
Yeah, of the proper residential scale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
that makes
but
a lot
I
of
think we
sense.
could
Like a
open
little
up.
bakery over here
It'd
would
be-
be really nice.
It'd be really nice. Coffee shops. I mean, there are
Yeah.
uses that might make a lot of sense.
And childcare. Could somebody look at childcare, please?
Yes, childcare.
I don't think we should have to quit our jobs to stay.
Yeah.
Let's go to Michael.
Yeah, they're not.
We're-
Michael for three.
Yeah,
So in the commercial world, obviously, we're commercial use. And this is one of the places the translation, I would say, maybe didn't make it all the way, and it's up to you, I guess, to decide, but. Especially in the waterfront district where we're involved. What used to be. But now says private boat sales, service and storage. If you want it that vague, but it used to be more specific so far as launching, hauling, handling, fueling, because those were all uses that are done on the waterfront. And if I were looking at private boat sales, service and storage, I could argue all day long what you would allow us to do and not allow us to do. So the two marinas in this city, including the city's marina, making it free is a big part. So you didn't translate the retail space for the waterfront district. And the private sale of boats, service and storage also in this form isn't in the M1 district. And you might think about that because that's pretty much all that's in the M1 district in this town. Is boat storage, service, not necessarily sales, but. And then the retail, we do have retail, Wall Street has retail. It's always been allowed, although there was a limitation on square footage and that didn't make it across. I guess you've answered the question because you have a category of outdoor sales and display.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
I mean, it's not allowed anywhere, and it's.
But it is, but then it,
But it is a lot.
but it is allowed in various cases. So,
But it is,
and I also don't understand the asterisks under drinking establishments where it's a special use in the waterfront district. I don't see a reference to an asterisk. Do you know what that means?
If it's got, there's supplemental additional requirements in here. It's a special use, but there's also supplemental conditions that go in.
In the existing.
But you have that in your notes all over the place, Article 7. So what makes,
Yeah, if you go up to like page 6, it says, the simple asterisk indicates land uses that have supplemental regulations provided in Article 7 of this ordinance.
but it's just that one thing and lots of uses have supplemental.
I think there were some other spots where.
Oh, the
there's a
asterisk
lot
is
of
all over the
asterisks.
place.
And I think that speaks to what we're going to simplify.
Yeah,
We feel like there's a lot of stuff. Might be,
You get all the-
because we've layered in so many different things, you know, we desire to control things minutely. That, they say no whenever somebody wanted to. I think a lot of that's what we cleaned up, but we can't miss things like Michael's saying, because, you know.
Yeah.
There are things that are in there that have.
So I have an idea. Michael, would you like to propose a definition, an updated definition of, you know, waterfront business? That you see? in
Yeah,
town?
I mean, I'm pretty sure probably Dave wrote the stuff that's in the old one. But we could just clarify it because there's nothing that I see about fuel sales. I don't sell fuel, so I don't really care, but Wallstrom does.
Yeah, would you be willing to give us a updated definition that you think would be,
Yeah, I can give you.
would cover the nature of today's business?
Well, I think something to remember is that even if we haven't specified it as a use, those activities might be listed under one of these other uses as part of that, right? We don't
Yeah.
talk about retail sales of various things at at an automotive
True.
repair facility,
True.
but that is a sub-use of, you know, that Dan up at Harbor Car Care is gonna sell, I think he's got candy bars in the lobby and he sells quarts of oil and windshield wipers and things like that. And so when we look at some of these other uses and the definitions for those uses that are permitted in the waterfront district, there's some uses that go along with that. Like, obviously, I don't think we specify office use within the waterfront district, but we know that a portion of a boat sale building is going to have offices for the employees.
Sure.
And then I think we specify maybe a percentage of the building that can be allocated to that use.
Okay, well, we can check that, but
Are you saying you do that in the definitions?
I think when we look at the definition for, there will be some criteria under that you can do. For example, another example that I can use is like when we have restaurants versus specialty restaurants within the CBD. We specify specialty restaurants must have X amount of seating, must have certain things, or cannot have this, and so it's in the definition triggered whether you are specialty restaurant or full line restaurant.
and will those things carry over to the new zoning code also, though?
Unless you choose to change those definitions, yeah. And I think that some of those things might be within the criteria for some of these uses.
So didn't we just get done saying that if it doesn't say so, you can't?
No.
The other thing that's specifically in the old code was the ability to use inside the building for parking in the summer months. It's not in here. It's a hugely critical thing for us. So these are specific items that were put in the old code for
Well,
a reason.
yeah, and my answer to that question is that under your current code, it not only has uses, but then it also has standards. Okay, which is a no-no. So, for example, it says there's a standard here, outdoor display of recreational boats may not be placed within 5 feet of any crosswalk, driveway, or entrance of a building, and that's under permitted uses or accessory use, permitted accessory uses. So within here, within your description of what's allowed as a permitted or accessory, you've also blended in site standards that will not appear on this table. So
But they will be in the code, just in a different section.
they'll be in a code, but in a different section. So you see, that's, and when you're trying to take this and put it, simplify it, you cannot take all the standards and bring it with you. Now, you know, since there's a number of marinas here in town that are retail sales and do other things, maybe there needs to be a new definition for what constitutes a marina, rather than try to break it out into all various components.
I agree.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. So really, that's the task, is coming up with a definition for a marina operation that would allow, regardless if you sell fuel or not, within the definition, you're allowed to.
Yeah, so if planning commission's okay, should we go to an expert and let Michael give us a draft on what the current definition ought to be for a marina?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Are you willing to do that for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you very
Great.
much. That's great.
John, I've got a few years of experience in lawsuits over this.
Oh, no,
so
and I appreciate
Trying to
it.
be very helpful, but at the same time, my job is to protect what our business
And I get
has
it.
as
I
much
get
as I
it. I
can.
get it.
All right. Well, in light of time, let's move on to, let's scan manufacturing uses, see if anything triggers any members on that. Wonder what a contractor establishment is.
It's up here someplace.
Yeah, once again, central cleaning facilities, what is that?
What is that?
We don't allow it?
It's not even in your definitions.
No, I don't see a contractor establishment.
That's not in your definitions either.
No. There's a right for removal.
It's food manufacturing, is food manufacturing, light manufacturing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
A central cleaning facility would be
Service pro.
like Service Pro,
Yeah.
or it'd be like a
Um,
restaurant company that collects payment costs, and then they bring them to a central facility to launder them. That's a central.
Central.
But that's industrial.
Like,
That's
that's
industrial.
like
That's,
Citgo.
that's light industrial.
Yeah, but that's not even allowed in the community.
Research and I thought it was development, but maybe I should.
Yeah,
The last line?
it
goes over on the
carried
next
over on the other side.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
Next page.
we'll change the table. It's research and development.
Facilities, got it.
So
I was research and then somewhere else it was development facilities.
And should boathouses be under manufacturing?
Yeah, that's a weird spot for that.
And they also probably wouldn't be located in M1. Unless you let me dig a really long. channel.
Long channel.
Yeah, we list that as a permitted use in M1,
Yeah.
so we'll have to double check that and see if that's.
All right, so I think the action item on these would be to modernize and reduce if applicable.
I think the other part that PC needs to know, whatever ends up in this table, we need to have a definition for it.
Yeah.
What are people's thoughts about distilleries?
So I was just thinking of breweries.
Distillers and breweries, I
I
mean,
was thinking the same.
those are
thing.
actually good things.
Are they on,
They're not allowed.
they're not permitted?
They're not allowed.
No,
Breweries, distilleries, I mean, some
Because
sort
we
of
had-
microbreweries.
we had a the property out at the airport.
What's that?
Something in, we had a request at council out the property out at the airport that we own about a brewery or distillery
Okay.
that didn't pan out, but I mean, nowadays, those, I think it's a different connotation than what it was when this was written.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So,
some towns have made some
Good.
I have a question.
Rick.
We've covered lodging establishments in this one section, and earlier we covered boarding and rooming houses and bed and breakfast. Shouldn't we be discussing short-term rentals in this section uses?
Yep.
Because we don't have anything listed here for that, and I think that's a pretty hot potato right now.
I think we're handling that in the city code, not the zoning code.
You know, that's under the license.
It's under that's under a license in the city code as opposed to the zoning code.
Yeah.
The difficulty, if you bring that into the zoning code, now anybody that's operating a short-term rental property is grandfathered in.
Mhm.
That's why we don't have it here, because we don't want to create that situation.
But you'd want to eventually figure out where you want to allow ADUs.
Right.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
I also didn't see anything about what do you call a marijuana store?
Dispensary.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to or same thing, you want to permit them or not, or
The city
I don't know if they're protected.
forbids,
City-
Well, I think there was city council has, I know that came to city council a couple of years ago after there was the state ballot proposal. And everybody had to take some type of action, and I think at this point in time, don't quote me, but I believe that we've kind of tabled it, that we're not ready for it yet. And I don't know if city council is gonna relook at that at some point in
Do
the
we need
future.
a definition for it?
Hmm?
Do we need to define it unless we're putting it in place? I guess?
I don't know.
Are they just considered retail?
No, you would,
Huge.
you would have it, if the city had opted in and said, we want to allow dispensaries and processing, then you would designate what zoning code, what zoning district that you want. But and this is what we had an issue, and they talked about it a little bit, I think in Petoskey. Some of the planning commission, when they were updating their code, says, well, why don't we put them into code? And then the question came up, if you put it in the code, you're basically saying it's permitted or not permitted, even though the city had opted out. So you only put it in the code if you're opting in, then you decide what district. So you would amend it later on if you decided to do it.
So we might get there at some point.
They're failing at such huge rates right now,
Are they?
those businesses.
good question though.
Not advocating for it.
All right, let's take stock of where we are and where we come on this tonight. And talk about next steps. So, John and Jeff kind of took some action items here.
You want me to we'll go back and revise this table?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
And then what we'll do is, let's talk about format now, so when we get halfway through this, I don't have to go back and kind of remember everything. Do you want to see kind of like an edited version tracking? So what we delete, we'll strike out,
Yep.
and what we add, we put
Red
in.
line version.
Please.
So that way you can see where the modifications were.
Okay, thanks. Good suggestion. And then this is gonna take you probably more than 2 weeks or,
We could have the revised table for your January PC meeting.
not December, in
No.
2 weeks.
What's your December meeting?
December 15th.
This is a special.
You need to. Well, you're gonna want to see it then?
I don't know. I'm just talking about.
I'll do it.
Okay, the team says no.
Got to do the first.
Depends what else is on.
Yeah, it depends what else is on the agenda.
At this point in time, the only thing that we have on the agenda for the December 15th meeting is city council, at their November 21st meeting. Reviewed our recommendations for short-term rental. And they came up with some new ideas, somewhat in line with what we suggested, but also some differences. So we'll be discussing how to take the ideas that they came up with and implement them. That's really the only thing on the agenda right now.
But that could be
That'll take,
big.
that'll be a big
Yeah,
issue.
I think this, having an off-cycle meeting has been
Yeah.
productive. Do you guys agree?
This is one topic to do.
So do you want to figure that we'll do it again? Maybe in early January, I guess that would be a month from now. And my
That'll be the first.
PC's out of power, so I don't know what that date is.
Yes, I think January 1st is Sunday. We know that. So.
At a regular meeting or at a special meeting?
Special meeting, so
It's the
fourth,
5th. Well, first, second.
The fifth.
third, fourth, fifth, yeah.
January 5th, Thursday, 5:30.
Kids are back in
Does
school.
that work for everybody? John, is that
I'll put it on the calendar.
enough time for you to?
Yeah, gotta
Turn
get
it
the
around.
front, sure.
Okay, good.
What's the date?
So on Thursday.
Fifth.
January
January 5th.
I think it's my mom's birthday.
All right, I think we made a good start tonight
Absolutely.
and identified some places to modernize, streamline, and raise some big questions too. That we'll look forward to.
And then at the next one, then we'll start talking about some of the dimensional requirements then.
Yeah, I guess maybe we'd start with taking a look at the updated
Table, maybe
Table.
jump into the dimension.
of the
Okay, good.
uses.
That's where all my.
And then, yeah, we could get into more.
John, could I ask just at that one, in the January, a real, just a brief overview of where setbacks came from and why they were put into place in the first place? Jeff or John? Just a quick, and I mean, a quick review, I don't, not ours, but just so that I think I understand a little more about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't really have anything to know why we have the specific setbacks that we do have, other than typically most communities have some form of setback requiring you in certain districts to be set back from the property line.
Oh, I know that. I'm just curious, way back Euclid, is that where it started?
Well,
Euclid?
I remember Al Dyka talking about this once and he referenced, when a lot of this was done, they looked at the existing buildings and where they were. So I used those as a guideline because they didn't want to create too many non-conforming structures.
Here in Harbor.
Here.
Yeah, and I'm asking further back from that.
Oh,
Where did it start?
Oh,
Yeah, where did they start? Why did they start? I'm curious. I think
It started back with the,
the Euclid,
no, it actually started back with the first zoning enabling code that was developed by Herbert Hoover when he was the Secretary of the Department of Commerce.
okay,
And typically, I
That
would
would be
tell you,
fascinating.
in most communities, you're gonna find a 25-yard front yard setback
uh-huh,
and a 35 rear yard setback. And then the dimensions on the sides are where people come up with a 10 with at least 1 5, which is kind of odd. But that means you have 5 and 5. You got your 8, and then in some communities, like Jeff was saying here, they have a percentage. And I think that percentage is used up in like West Traverse as well, that if your lot exceeds a certain dimension, then it's a percentage of whatever that width is. So, but I will tell you, on all the a lot of the codes I've looked at over the years, 25 is the front, 35 is the rear,
and
and they
didn't,
date all the way back 100 years.
didn't some of that happen, is it Euclid, Ohio, where there was a big suit in the 30s or 40s?
Euclid, Ohio was the village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty.
Right, a realty, right,
That was the Supreme Court case that established the validity
of
of
zoning.
zoning in a
Right.
local community.
And then and someone come out with just a typical zoning code and cities, towns had to buy it in order to get some federal funding.
That
I'm
was,
remembering, I don't remember.
that was called the Standard Zoning Enabling Code
Yep,
that was published by the federal government.
okay. And in order to get,
And well, the feds said,
yeah,
in terms of their housing policies, if you want our FHA mortgage,
right,
you've
You
got to
have
have the
to take a
zoning
zoning
code.
code.
And oh, by the way,
here it is.
here's the
Yeah,
model.
that's what I thought.
That's what they did.
That's why they're so standard all
That's
over.
why there's some.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good
That's-
learning.
I mean, I knew part of that story. I
You did a pretty good job, actually.
Thing.
All right, then why don't we go on to member comments? Anybody have any? I do have one thing, and that is many of our terms are expiring this month. I think 5 or 6 of us. And so, Jeff, do you have any updates on
Who's expired?
Yeah.
That's a good point. I will send out an email to everybody who is expiring.
Whose term is ending.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the key would be basically to ask if you would like to continue serving on. One thing is, it's not a guarantee that, but you obviously have the option to ask to be reappointed.
Or not?
Or not to. If you say I'm done with this, I want more time at home, that's totally understandable. Or say, I really enjoy this and I want to keep doing it. We'll reach out to you, and ask that question. And then, city council, is it, I'm not sure if it's the mayor or city council specifically, which it is, but they then, reappoint or appoint new members, so.
I believe it's council.
Is it council?
And I,
Can I
if
think-
people don't have applications on file for it, I can't think what the application's called. If you want to be on a committee, there's a thing you fill out through the city website that says why you want to be on. Pretty simple, but I would encourage if you don't have that there, that you do. And some of you who've been on a long time might not have one on file. They're pretty quick to fill out. But that way there's a record of who's asking, where you live and that kind of stuff. Victor's got all those.
I'll email out a copy of that to
Yeah,
everybody.
that would be good if you
Yeah,
have.
so we'll look for a message from you and we can all opt in or opt out. And then city council will decide.
And you can look at the planning commission online and it tells you when your terms expire,
Oh,
just in case you want to know.
Um,
It is there.
I would like to suggest that the message be delivered to the city council, that right now we have a pretty well-educated board and we're making a lot of changes. And if someone wants to stay on to be reappointed, I would really appreciate it if they allow that to happen. So that you can have consistency through this process we're going through. Because to bring in new people up to speed would take quite a bit of time. So I just put it out there.
And I'll relay that. It'll
Thank you.
probably partly depend on how many folks ask to be on.
Oh, of
you know.
course. Not putting pressure on anybody.
I was gonna say that's not good.
All right, well, I'd like to say thanks for serving this year, everybody. And I think we've been effective and we've tackled some tough stuff. And we disagreed at times, but I really appreciate your advice and input and collaboration.
We appreciate your leadership.
Yes, thank you.
All right, well, let's
You can't.
no, let's adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you for the folks that came out.
Merry Christmas, everybody.